It's a story called The House of Unrequited Love. Taxi drivers are so full of shit. I should have just let it go. I had almost fallen asleep at that point, drifted off in the back of the cab as we passed all those grim Eastern Bloc apartment buildings that line the road from the airport. The statues of workers whizzed by as if they were floating through my dreams, and maybe they were. I was nodding off or just starting to when I couldn't help hearing the driver laud the wonders of his incredible city, which I politely neglected to tell him looked like a wasteland so far. But he was proud of it, and that's fine, and as it should be, I guess. And then he said what a lot of taxi drivers probably say when they have a lone male fare at night. He said something like, I mean, if you imagine it, you find it in this city. And I should have just ignored him and continued on my way to dreamland, because we all know that he was just a taxi driver talking shit, as they all do. And we also know exactly what he means, and that's not about whether I can imagine a unicorn in flight or the sudden arrival of world peace. He was hinting at your everyday, ordinary sordidness, something that any teenage boy or dirty old man could think up. But the contrarian in me took the bait. His pride, his arrogance just got to me somehow, and I wanted to challenge him. My imagination was sparked. Now I was wide awake. I wasn't going to ask for something totally out of the realm of possibility, but something closer to his stupid insinuations, close enough that it would show up as empty boasting. All right, so what about a real old-school bordello, like Wild West, with a player piano and... No sooner had I started what I gleefully thought would be a description of a place that couldn't possibly be found within 1,000 miles of here, if anywhere, than he swings a U-turn with some maniacal glee of his own. When we arrived at the darkened villa of Madame L's, there was only the pale light of a lantern outside, showing any sign of life. My first thought was I was about to be robbed and murdered. My second was that he dragged me to an ordinary brothel, and it was all my stupid fault. It was presumably Madame L. herself who opened the door, wearing a full-length taffeta gown of glistening silver. But as elegantly got up as she was, my eyes shot right past her, because it was the cavernous room behind her that stunned me, and it wasn't just what I saw, which extended farther than the apartment block should have allowed, as if it were an optical illusion, but also what I heard, the metallic echo of a player piano. I stepped inside and saw a bar stocked with whiskey, bourbon, and gin. I saw the ladies standing upstairs with their jeweled hands on the mezzanine railing or lounging on the plush satin couches far back by the mirrors, their faces lit by candelabras or the light of their phones. That idiot taxi driver had delivered on my weak challenge, so now I needed to really get my imagination going. This was just a warm-up. My driver was waiting outside, clearly not at all surprised I was out this quickly. So, nice, yes? He said, a bit too satisfied for my liking. I've seen better. Still, I wonder if you have... Oh, never mind. There's no way. I only caught a glance of his eyes in the rearview mirror, a look of hesitation. It was the look of a tennis player about to receive serve, except I had thrown out my wistful never mind without a clue of where I was actually referring to. He started off as if I had given up and he was taking me to my hotel. Acknowledging defeat was not an option. When I got off the plane and into the taxi, all I had wanted to do was get to my hotel and into bed. Now all I cared about was out-imagining my adversary, just finding that one blank spot on the map. I had become that deranged explorer willing to sacrifice everything to find El Dorado, though unlike those explorers, my desperation rested on the hope of it not actually existing. My driver, meanwhile, seemed as invested as I was. He now kept the engine running when I went to check on an establishment, as if he knew I wouldn't stay, because staying was beside the point. If another fare had come, he would have turned them away. We were on a mission. My mind leapt ahead to more modern impossibilities. I'd been to an exhibit at the Guggenheim a week earlier, so I described the museum to him, the circular structure, and once he understood, he took a hard left, and I had the sinking feeling I would have to try again. In truth, it was no Frank Lloyd Wright architectural masterpiece. It was more like a sewer tunnel that wound deep into the underground, flush with exposed pipes and the occasional scurrying rat. Instead of works of art on the walls, there were red-lit doors with women hovering within tiny cubicles. I don't know how many levels its circular descent continued into the darkness below. From there, it was a feverish rush from place to place, because no sooner did an off-the-wall idea come out of my mouth, the red light district of Calcutta, a house of mirrors filled with seeming robots, then the taxi driver would drive me straight there as nonchalantly as if I had given him an ordinary street address. The joyless rush, the hopeless frenzy, this must be what it's like for actual sex tourists, sex addicts, men going from one of these brothels to the other with the same lack of satisfaction, except obviously not because they are engaged in a mortal battle of wills with a taxi driver. And then I began thinking of all the agony and dissatisfaction of my ordinary love life, and it suddenly hit me where I'd been going wrong all evening. From the start of this chess match of the imagination, I had been locked in on external trappings, on appearances. But when you think about love and passion, even sex, the most important thing obviously isn't the decor, the time and place, the architecture. All of that falls away in the face of your inner turmoil, your inner joy, and whatever other emotions you're experiencing. And that is the line of thinking that will allow me to imagine a place that this God-forsaken city can't possibly have. I was relieved that this painful realization had come to me now, rather than, say, 2 weeks after returning home when I wouldn't have been able to lob it back at my taxi-driving opponent. But now I had to channel it into a specific idea, a possible, or I was hoping impossible, place to go. So I tried to distill my romantic life down to its essence, to its dregs, to have my love life flash before my eyes as if it were on the verge of dying. I looked back on the most intense emotions I had ever felt and realized with sorrow that they were always for women who not only never loved me back, but almost definitely had never known or even had a clue how I felt about them. And again, I just said out loud what I was thinking, and again, to my disbelief, my driver immediately turned the car in response, this time onto a 2-lane highway full of potholes on the way to a house of unrequited love. When we pulled into the parking lot, I didn't feel any emotional draw at all. There was nothing evocative about the place. It didn't even really look like a brothel, but reminded me more of one of those featureless buildings off the expressway in South Jersey that could house anything from a chiropractor's office to a liquor store. "Are you sure?" I asked the driver nervously, forgetting that I desperately wanted him not to be sure, to finally be wrong about a place. "I am always sure, 100%. He brought me inside and introduced me. I knew by the nearly empty lot that I would be the only customer, but what was strange were the 3 big goons, skinhead security guard types, standing by the door. I had no idea why. Maybe this is the place I'd be robbed, killed, and buried in the woods out back. As I sat down in the shabby foyer with a handful of bored ladies in negligee, there was still no immediate way to see if the driver was right or wrong. So I looked them over one by one to see if a sense of unrequited longing came over me, and when it didn't, I just chose one who had a hairstyle like the silent film star, Louise Brooks, a look I've always liked, and we went to a room. The bedroom felt like a basement, though I knew it wasn't, because I was looking out a filthy window into a clump of trees. Somehow it was even shabbier than the lounge, reeking of stale cigarette smoke and decorated only with a mirror, a small portable radio, and a pair of condoms. My unrequited love began to undress, but I immediately told her to wait. "You don't want?" she asked, with a muted alarm in her doughish brown eyes totally unsuited to her line of work, because they were far too warm and welcoming. Looking at her eyes, I realized that besides the haircut, she was the polar opposite of the Louise Brooks vamp type. The reason for her alarm wasn't really a fear of having an unsatisfied customer in advance, but more that she didn't speak much, if any, English. The problem for me was how I could explain why I had come here. Not for sex, obviously, and not to talk out of loneliness or to tell sob stories, but to bide my time in silence if necessary, and see if a feeling of unrequited love either does or doesn't build up in me. It was hard enough explaining that to myself. "Massage?" she asked, making a gesture as if she were squeezing a ball, just in case I didn't understand what she meant. I sat up and let her rub my shoulders while I waited. I could see her brown eyes in the mirror. She was smiling but looked sad. Once in a while I said something to her, asked her a question, and she did her best to answer. She started to rub my shoulders more firmly. I must have closed my eyes for a second. I felt her breath on my cheek before her lips touched, followed by her hand slithering down my chest. "Oh, no, I really don't want to." "You don't like me?" I wasn't sure what to say. She seemed genuinely disappointed. No, you're so nice, so beautiful too, but it's so hard to explain. I'm trying to see, but nothing, and I don't want any of this." I was pointing at the bed, at the condoms. I hoped she understood. She put her hand back on my shoulder and was squeezing, but without any conviction or force now. I felt bad, but didn't know what else I could say. The sound of a car horn broke the awkward silence. It was my taxi driver. "I guess my time's up. I should go." "You can more stay if you want." I couldn't stand looking at her face for another second. I stood up, gave her a brush on the shoulder as a goodbye, mumbled a farewell, and rushed out. Any pleasure I expected to feel at being right was extinguished by the inexplicable disgust I felt stepping out of the doors of this hideous place. And then just as I was about to get into the taxi, just as I pulled the door handle, I heard the screaming. I thought a fight must have broken out inside. There were a few more cars parked in the lot, so maybe the new customers were brawling, and that's what happens here sometimes, and that's what the goons were for. But the screaming was a woman's voice, and it was piercing. I turned around and saw the Louise Brooks hairstyle and what used to be doe eyes, but now were crazed and full of fury and pain. She was being held by all three goons at once, one per arm, while another had his massive arms wrapped around her waist. They weren't doing this with cruel relish, as thugs might be expected to do, but as if they were holding back a wild animal. I had no idea what she was screaming. I couldn't understand her, but what I did know was that she was screaming at me. It was as if she had just injected a drug and was having a psychotic reaction, though it was clear that wasn't what had happened. I didn't know what to do. Everyone around me, the goons, my driver, another customer nonchalantly finishing up his cigarette on the way in, they were all fine and matter-of-fact about it. It was as if they didn't see her naked rage or didn't see her there at all, as if this happens all the time, every hour, like clockwork. So I got in the car and looked in the rearview mirror, watching them pull her back inside, no longer screaming, but with a desperate, pleading, love-lorn look on her face that I know I will never be able to erase from my memory. "Like I told," the driver said, "you imagine it, and we have it here."